Hi everyone, how are you doing? I hope you all had a fantastic holiday weekend. I am waiting for CJ. Hi CJ, how
Hi,
are you doing?
hi. I think this time we've
Okay, I think, okay, is that better?
I think it sounds good. I don't hear
Okay,
myself.
okay, perfect. I had to take off my home Wi-Fi for some reason. It's not working properly.
And
So how are you doing? We're going to give people a little bit of time to pop in.
I'm good. I'm glad that I'm able to be participate in this, and I'm ready to talk.
Well, we are excited that you are actually able to participate because we don't really hear, I mean, we hear about diabetes stigma, but we don't hear a lot about it. And from what I've ran into in the past, especially through social media, depending on what generation and how old the person is, they don't know, they don't consider them being talked down to or disrespected, or they don't consider it stigma. So we're going to get into that in a second. Because first, I got to do the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to DiaTribe Live with Miss CJ Walker. Today, we are going to talk about diabetes related stigma. And of course, we want to send a shout out and a thank you to One Drop for making this conversation possible. And also, thank you, CJ, for joining us. So, can you tell everyone who's listening a little bit about yourself and your connection to diabetes?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is CJ. I'm a wife and mom of three from Virginia, and I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes back in 2019, unexpectedly. And since then, that's where the journey really has started for me. Even though I wasn't having any symptoms at the time, I did have a deep family history of diabetes. My dad, my sister, my grandmothers, both grandmothers, great aunt, great uncle, you name it, we diabetes everywhere.
Wow.
So I really started advocating for diabetes a little while after I was diagnosed, and I've learned a lot since then, and I'm just really ready to share what I've learned and what I'm still learning on this journey.
So it's funny because you put there's a lot of nuggets in the conversation and even just your intro that we're going to talk about. But if you can back up to when you were first diagnosed, were you diagnosed during the pandemic? Right
No,
before the
no, I think it was March of 2019, so pre-pandemic days.
Okay, because I'm like, I'm getting 2020, 20, I don't even know what year. I think this is 2021, so please forgive me. Um, what was your reaction when you found out that you had diabetes?
Absolutely shocked. I went to the doctor for another condition, and it was a follow-up meeting. And those results came out well, but right before we were getting ready to head out, he was like, "Oh, you know what? Your blood sugar is at a 300." I'm like, blank stare, like, what? He told me to go to a lab core, take another test, and I did, and found out that my A1C was actually at a 10.8. So I was officially diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I was absolutely shocked. I think the day that I found out that my blood sugar level was at 300, I cried pretty much all afternoon. Like,
Well, so why did you cry?
I cried because even though I knew that, diabetes was definitely in our family, I watched my grandmother personally go through it. And for some reason, I just felt that that wasn't going to happen to me. Even though, I have some of the risk factors, as I have three children and I had gestational diabetes with two out of the three children. So I did have some of those risk factors, but, I was eating a low carb diet and, stayed pretty busy and everything. So it was just something that I felt that didn't think was going to happen to me, but here I am.
Wow. So, what is it like when you tell people you have diabetes? Like, and also, how did it feel even telling your family, "Hey, I have diabetes"? What was their reaction?
You know what? Amazingly enough, my family was really supportive. My husband was with me when I first got the news and even when I was officially diagnosed. So he's been with me every step of the way. My mom was very encouraging. She's a nurse. So she helped me with a couple of tips. It's like, okay, well, if you're diagnosed with diabetes, this is some of the things that you have to do. And she walked me through that. And my dad was actually really supportive as well. And then, amazingly enough, my oldest sister was diagnosed a week before I was in 2019. So that was a shock to me because I didn't know. So we kind of formed a bond and just kind of checked up on each other and made sure that, we were okay. And unfortunately, she passed away in 2020 last year. So that was a huge loss for me. So I had to kind of go through the process and kind of just start over. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your sister. Wow, that's, I don't even want to, because it's still raw. So do you believe, or do you think, does diabetes stigma exist?
Absolutely. And for me, the stigma, actually, I'm going to have to admit this, but even I presented diabetes stigma in some ways. When I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, I used to be a part of this community with other women with gestational diabetes. And the way that it was presented to us was like, okay, well, if you're able to take care of yourself just through diet and exercise, you're good. But if you have to take insulin, then it's not good. So when I was diagnosed with diabetes this year, um, I felt like I didn't want to take insulin because of that same stigma that was through my mind. And that's what I portrayed insulin as, a failure, which now that I know that it's not. But that's what diabetes stigma does to you. But then again, I've also experienced diabetes stigma because I have a very thin body type. So, with diabetes, obesity is a factor, which clearly you can see I'm not. But people would look at me and think that I have type 1 diabetes because of that body type. So that's some of the things that I've been through as far as like with diabetes stigma, coming from me and from other people.
So when you stumbled across, so when you figured out that, okay, me going on insulin is not a failure, were
Right.
you able to take that back to that gestational diabetes group to say, hey, if you end up developing type 2 diabetes and you have the option to go on insulin, it's not a failure. You are doing everything that you possibly can. And sometimes you just need a little help, and that's okay.
Yep. And that's exactly what my message is today, that you're not a failure. It just means that you need a little bit more help, and that's okay.
Wow. So, do you think, or let me rephrase this, with us, with thinking that insulin is a failure, where did that where did that frame of thought or that frame of thinking come from, and what led to it?
many of the women who were in that particular community, I joined that community, because I needed that support. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of support with my family, mainly because they didn't know what it was and, what I was going through. So that's why I joined the community in the first place. But listening to the women there, the attitudes towards insulin, that's where it came from.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So we're going to fast forward. You're ready to tell your story, not just in this gestational diabetes group, but now you found the diabetes online community. What was your reaction? And if you have any examples, it's predominantly, yes, there's people with type 2, but they're not as outspoken, right, as the assumption as people with type
Right.
1. So I would love to hear your thoughts on the community as a whole first, and then I'll go with number 2.
Okay, so yeah, so when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I ended up once again going into different diabetes groups, mainly for low carb, for exercise, and for diet. And it's pretty interesting because you have certain groups that are very open, they're very friendly, and they're very supportive. But then you have other groups where they have strict rules. And even if you have a question that you really need answer to, you don't have any place to go, they will reject that. And some of those stigmas come in, when it comes to that, or if they come through, it's like, okay, well, my A1C is at a 8.7. Oh, well, that means you haven't been following the guidelines of the group. You've been eating non-compliant stuff. So that's some of the places where, that I've seen some of the diabetes stigma, instead of just encouraging them to, to see what's happening and come up with some ways to help. That's what they're getting. And then that drives people away from the group, and they figure, you know what, forget this. I'll do this on my own.
Say stigma. And stigma, some people don't understand. Stigma sometimes isn't just healthcare professionals, it's within the community. So I would love to hear your thoughts and your insights on, having someone who, like I said, who may want to come out and want to share. What would you say to them?
I say for me to definitely speak your truth. You know, for me, I did encounter that with the type 1 diabetes named that, they thought that I was a type 1 because, they were talking about topics regarding obesity. And that, I felt that didn't apply to me. And that's what the administrator just like said. It's like, oh, well, I hope you don't have type 1 diabetes. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, well, yeah, so I've been through that. But, overall, continue to speak your truth. And, there's a way to express yourself. You don't have to cuss anybody out or whatnot, but there's a certain way in language that you can use, to speak your truth.
Definitely. And what would you say to healthcare providers or people who who don't understand diabetes stigma and how that affects people living with both type 1 and I know you can't speak to type 1, but just diabetes in general. What would you say to them?
I would say communicate with your healthcare professional. This information that is, through diabetes organizations that speak about diabetes stigma. I would suggest to print it out and take it to your next doctor's appointment. That's one way. And then talk about it. Ask the questions about the stigma, and then find ways on what you can do. What type of ways that you can, communicate. But I would definitely communicate with healthcare professionals and let them know because, sometimes doctors may not know.
Mhm.
And, if we present the information to them, maybe they'll be able to, see things in a different light.
Definitely. And what would you say to the people in the diabetes community, especially in this online space where it can be harsh and sometimes people don't have a filter and not realize that we're better as a community together. So what would you say to the community about diabetes related stigma?
You know what? Education is everything. And, even with me, I'm learning something new every day about diabetes. That's just me. I'm a researcher at heart, so I'm always looking at, different shows or reading different articles, reading different books. That's just me. But education is key. And sometimes you have to go back to the basics. What is diabetes? What types of diabetes that you have? By the way, it's probably close to 15, but that's a different story. But but yeah, so you have, the education piece and then the language. I know a couple of weeks ago we were talking about how language matters. And like I said, there's a way that you can communicate what you feel using the proper language. So education and just the language. Those are the two main things, but I would give advice to the diabetes community.
No one did it to themselves. No one wakes up and says, I want to have diabetes. So no matter, no matter what the media may tell you, or even some healthcare providers may tell you, diabetes is not your fault. And, you know, there are some things that are different about diabetes type 1 and type 2, but there are a lot of similarities. And if we can just come to terms on those things, it would make us be better and also become a more inclusive community.
Absolutely.
So, because we want more people with type 2 like you, CJ, to tell their story and to share their story, because the diabetes community is not just about people with type 1. It's about people living with all types of diabetes, sharing different experiences from different socioeconomic backgrounds, everything. We need that, because once we all stand together, it makes it better for everybody.
Exactly. And, I did a video about a week and a half ago talking about this exact thing. And I talked about how diabetes is like an umbrella. And then underneath are all the different types of diabetes. There's different risks. And at the end of the day, there's the symptoms are the same. Your causes might be different. But at the end of the day, it's diabetes. No matter how you put it, it's under that same umbrella of diabetes.
So, with that being said, CJ, is there anything that I didn't ask that you wished I would have talked about?
No, but for those who are not living with diabetes, I want to remind you all to make sure that you get your A1C checked and your insulin levels checked at least a year.
Ah, that's a good PSA. That's a good PSA. It's funny because no one that I've interviewed has ever did a diabetes screening PSA on any of the Instagram live. So thank you for that. Um, let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, yes. For those who may not know who you are, where can people find you and follow you?
Yes, you can find me at the Genetic Diabetic blog at Instagram. I'm also on Facebook and I'm also on LinkedIn.
do not stop, because your voice of encouragement and you being able to operate in this space shows how far we've come as a community. And those who are listening or watching, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. And special thanks to One Drop for making this possible. We will have another Instagram Live here next week, and I will share what that title information is on the feed. But CJ, thank you so much, and I am so glad that you attended that the diabetes. It was the musings, because if I wouldn't have saw you there, this wouldn't be here. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your voice. It's welcome, and thank you for pulling up a seat to the table and welcoming everybody to that table. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful evening.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.